Now, Katie Patterson will speak about serious soup.
When Kathy Laws comes, we always feed her well. I want to tell you we feed people well on Monday morning, too, for Serious Soup. Serious Soup is one of the programs that your pledge supports. We've been going on for over a year now, and our numbers have jumped. We started with 30-some people. We're up to almost 100 people at this point. It's mainly our guests come from the downtown area. Some of them are homeless. Lots of them live in the high-rises or the apartments in the downtown area. This is an open program for all. We start fixing our food at 9 o'clock in the morning. We open our doors shortly after 11. People can come in, have a snack. We have a lot of food donated from the Salvation Army and from our members. We find that people are here not just for the good meal, but also for the fellowship. It's a safe place. There are no religious requirements. We don't have people confess their sins or say they will come to church on Sunday morning. Just come and have some fellowship in a safe place and a wonderful meal. Becky circulates amongst our members, hopefully connecting some of them up to some social service agencies that they can use. Our meal is not just soup. We have a main dish every Monday with a side dish. We have bread or rolls. We have a wonderful salad. Alice is in charge. She's waving her hand back there. Chops up all sorts of little good veggies in there, so they're getting some healthy food in there. We have fresh vegetables, fresh fruit. We have at least 4 kinds of soup every Monday morning, and we have dessert. We have milk, we have water, we have coffee, and gallons of chocolate milk. About 3 gallons every Monday morning of chocolate milk. We can always use your help. We can use help in the kitchen, starting at 9 o'clock in the morning. If that's not your thing, we're looking for soup donations. We're looking for dessert donations. In your bulletin each week, it has a list of things we need. Right now, we need Thousand Island dressing, so if anybody has some they'd like to pass on, we'd take it. Our mission statement, is Ann read, it talks about energizing downtown Rockford and beyond. This is something that I feel very passionate about. This is energizing downtown Rockford. This is Christianity in action. Thank you.
Good morning. And Ann, where are you sitting, Ann? You're right. And this morning I had a flat tire. And it wasn't the kind just to go to Casey's and pump it up. It was the kind to run to anybody open who knew what to do with it. It's really good to be with you today. I'm sorry for the reason I'm here. You had invited our interim conference minister, Reverend Justo Gonzalez, to be with you this morning to preach, and he's a very lively preacher, and he needs the microphone this way because he speaks with his hands and he walks around and he goes right up to people in the pew and pokes them in the chest. He tells marvelous stories. But on Thursday, our interim conference minister, Justo, had open heart surgery after he fainted a couple of times and had what they thought were mini strokes, TIAs, at the General Synod of the United Church of Christ back in June. And after a lot of testing, the Cleveland Clinic discovered a tumor growing on a heart valve, which is highly unusual. So he has come through the surgery well. Thank goodness. It'll be a while before we see him, though. So we've kept Justo in our prayers, and then Becky and Justo invited me and brought in the second string for today. So I'm glad to be with you. I want you to know that, thank you. I want you to know that we've also been keeping Pastor Rebecca in our prayers. In our association meeting yesterday in Sterling, she was lifted up, and in our regular staff meetings. We remember her as well. I also want to thank you for this beautiful rite on All Saints Sunday to remember loved ones. Thursday night, I lost a very dear friend who was just 2 months shy of 104 years old. He was lively. He was on the search committee that called me to Elburn almost 30 years ago. And when he moved to DeKalb to live in assisted living, he took me to breakfast every month just to catch up and to ask me about me. So this is very meaningful to me to be with you today. It was about 35 years ago that my grandmother died, and I loved her dearly. And the Anglican church that she had been very, very active in her whole life in Montreal had a brand new priest. And so when he learned there's a minister in the family, he did what I would have done. And he called me right away and said, "Oh, you can preach." So I didn't know your grandmother. So I met with him prior to the service, a couple days ahead of time, with my dad, it was his mother who had died. And we talked about my grandmother, and it was really a wonderful conversation, telling this priest about how wonderful my grandmother was and her faith. And we put together the order of service, and we included, of course, For All the Saints. So when Becky said we were going to sing For All the Saints today, that takes me right back to wonderful times of wonderful memories of my grandmother's service. Well, 18 months later, my grandmother's second husband died. My father's father had died when he was quite young. My grandmother had remarried. And we had known him as a family friend, so we called him Uncle George. Well, Uncle George died. It's the same priest, and I go to meet with him in the office, and we're talking about the order of service, and he said he regretted he didn't really know Uncle George, but I said, well, he didn't really come to church all that often. And we're going through what we would do for the order of service, and I said, well, at Granny's service, we sang For All the Saints. And Peter Asbell looked at me and he said, we don't have to sing that at every funeral. Oh, okay. We didn't. Singing it today was very powerful and moving because we are remembering the saints in our midst, the lives of those who have gone before us. We're holding close to our hearts those memories. I want to say one more thing about your congregation, and that is to thank you for Pastor Becky. At our meeting yesterday for the Prairie Association, we had an update of our Prairie Association directory. And it seems that Pastor Becky's job title has changed about 3 times a year since I've known her. And her new title, newish to me, is Pastor of Member Care and Neighborhood Connections. And number one, that's the only job title in the association, and I checked in the conference. That's the only person with that job title in all our churches. You've also got the ideal person for that position. Thank you, Lord, for Pastor Becky. This is the reading for today. It's from Luke 19. It's verses 1 to 10, and it's the story of Zacchaeus. How many of you perhaps grew up or in Sunday school know the story of Zacchaeus? How many of you know that wretched song called "He Was a Wee Little Man"? And how many of you were taller than all the boys in 8th grade and were made fun of when we had to sing that terrible, terrible thing? Well, Jesus entered Jericho, and he was passing through it. And a man was there named Zacchaeus, and he was the chief tax collector, and he was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not, because he was short in stature. So he ran ahead and he climbed a sycamore tree to see him. And remember, sycamore trees are very leafy. I think he was hiding up there. He was hidden. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and he said to him, "Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today." So he hurried down and was happy to welcome Jesus. And all who saw this began to grumble. And they said, "Jesus is gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner." Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, "Look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor, and I will pay back, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay them back 4 times as much." And Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man has come to seek out and save the lost." And Zacchaeus was lost. I think it was Anne and then Katie mentioned in her announcement about living life in community, about Christianity in action. Our speaker yesterday told us as a church we need to get out of the book of Numbers, worrying about how many bottoms are in the pew and how many bucks are in the plate. We need to get out of the book of Numbers and get into the book of Acts. The book of Acts, because as Christians, we are action people. We're people who feed the poor and welcome the homeless and find a way to integrate into our community those like Zacchaeus who live on the edge, who are outcasts because of their professions or their demeanor or simply who they are. Living life in community is really hard. It's a whole lot easier to be a Zacchaeus and to collect our taxes quietly and amass our wealth than it is to break bread with people we don't know, people we probably don't agree with politically, people who sit across the aisle from us. I read about a minister years and years ago. On Sunday mornings, he had half a piece of paper that fit inside a bulletin. And before church, he would scrawl a great big Z, a Z on that. And he'd go to the usher, and he'd ask the usher to stuff it in one of the bulletins. Now, whether this is true or not, I think it's bold of this pastor. Well, people would get their bulletins, sit down, and if the paper with the Z dropped out of your bulletin, the pastor had just invited him to lunch at your house. Pretty bold. I'm not sure it's entirely true, and I would never do it myself. And actually, if my pastor did that, I would never go back to church there. I'm not going to clean my house every Sunday morning in case the pastor's coming, by chance. Jesus is asking us to be prepared in a different kind of way, not to have your house spick and span for the unexpected visitor, but to have your heart open to the stranger, to the sinner, to the one that we're not going to agree with. Jesus calls us into community, not to be about ourselves, but to be about the people that we're called to serve, to ask, to be with. Becky, when Katie talked about you circulating amongst the guests on Monday nights at Serious Soup, that's being Jesus. It would be very easy to sit in the corner. It's easy to look at our phones or do a crossword puzzle. It's not so easy to pick ourselves up and interact with people whom we're afraid of or whom we're afraid won't like us. Zacchaeus' story isn't a conversion story. Scholars have said that the translation we have, where he says to Jesus, Lord, I will pay back fourfold. I will make things right. I will be a better person, are not quite right, that there's a verb in the original Greek that is more like, I have and I'm going to still do this. Zacchaeus isn't converted to a new faith because Jesus called him down from a tree and invited himself to lunch. Zacchaeus' heart seems to already have been changed. He's already making things right with those whom he has taken too much money or defrauded. He's already doing this, and I think that's why he went to the sycamore tree. Not to be confronted, but to be affirmed. To see the one who had changed his heart to make him open to a new way of living. If I knew what that word was in Greek and if I could translate it into English, I would use that word here today for second first. Because you already are, and you will continue to do, the work, the ministry, and the service necessary to be that community of faith that is already taking care of those whom God loves, that is already circulating among the tables of your honored guests on Monday, that already is putting money and muscle, time and energy into making a difference in this setting where God has placed you. Pastor Becky encouraged us to remember the saints who have gone before us today and the saints in our midst. You are the saints in our midst. You are that great cloud of witnesses. You are the people encouraging and inviting and growing up to be the shepherds of those who will still come. You are the people of God. And with grateful thanks, with great admiration, with a great deal of respect, and with a lot of fondness for this church, I commend you. And I invite you to come down from that tree or from that place that you're holding back just a little bit and join Becky on a Monday and meet the people who are serving in the kitchen and who are seated at the tables. I invite you to join Steve Showers. Where are you, Steve? When he is undertaking a project for the beautification of the church. But most of all, I encourage you to come here on Sundays and be a part of this community of faith where we nurture one another and then we are blessed and sent forth to be the church ourselves. On this All Saints' Day, we remember those who have gone before us, and our hearts are open because we're looking to be filled with love. As you leave this place, may your heart continue to be open, remembering the saints and remembering the call that God has placed on you, because you are saints, not saints in training. You are saints. Amen.